Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's March 21st, 2020. I've been inside boiling down a little bit of beeswax, and I thought it might be advantageous, considering the difficult time that we're in right now. Folks may be considering, who've never grown vegetables before, maybe I'd like to start growing some of our own food, especially during difficult times like this. So if you have the means of getting other food resources simultaneously, then I would suggest starting small. If you're really concerned and you need to get started and try to grow as much food as you can, that's going to be a little bit more challenging. I'd recommend getting a good book, doing a lot of online research as well, following videos. When you get to larger scale home gardening, then you're getting to watching some of the videos that we have here. But that's all outside in permanent raised beds. Or I have made some videos in the past about rain gutter gardening. These are self-watering systems as well. But today I thought I'd focus on what we can start just maybe if you're in an apartment in the city. Just about anyone, if you've got access to some decent lighting, like let's say 6 hours a day of lighting, you could grow microgreens. Or you could grow lots of microgreens if you had some fluorescent, like shop lights that you could use, or shop fluorescent or shop LED lights. Some people will actually create a little grow room and paint the room white and all, or like a closet could be done as well. And for growing some vegetables, you're going to need to use something more. You have to get a fuller light spectrum, which is beyond the scope of this video today. But the thing I would say, the most important element to think about now is the amount of light exposure you have. And the more southern exposure that you have, so if you have a south-facing fire escape or balcony or patio, or you have sliding glass doors facing south, in those situations, then the sun's going to rise in the east and set in the west, and you're going to get lots of sunlight coming in, as long as there isn't a big awning out over the south, which is going to shade the area where you're going to get all the light in. So lighting is the most important thing. Some plants don't need quite as much. Your herbs don't need quite as much light, necessarily, not all herbs. And your green leafy vegetables, both herbs and green leafy vegetables for the most part are easier to start off with. The time to get the product ready to consume is a shorter duration. So starting off with green leafy vegetables and herbs is probably a nice formula for success, and you don't need as much materials as well. Intermediate plants, then we're talking about the root crops, and that can be grown potatoes, and often people will do towers, like large tall sacks, or some people will build wooden crate systems, and they slowly build them up over time, so that as the potato plant starts to grow, you add more soil on top of it, and then as the potato plant grows up further, you add more soil, and then later on you can harvest it. Carrots are a real easy plant to get to harvest in an intermediate time zone. Beets are pretty quick to grow. You get both the leafy greens off the beets, and you get the beet plant itself. And there's all different variations of carrots and different variations of beets, all of these different plants as well. Then when you get to the eggplants, the peppers, the tomatoes, it takes much more time, and you need a lot more sun, a lot more warmth in order to grow those plants. But there's nothing like being able to have some beautiful bell peppers or banana peppers. Oh gosh, I love our banana peppers, and delicious tomatoes as well. And choosing the variety that will work for you the most, and I've made videos about those in the past, but those take more time to get to harvest. So, and you can actually have several crops of your green leafy vegetables, your spinach, your your kale, your lettuce, and your arugula, and your various herbs, your mint, your rosemary, your oregano. And some of these are perennial plants that can keep coming back year after year as well, including thyme. So there's some plants that you know, I would suggest reading more about or watching videos about them. I've made videos about just about all of these various plants and all. So these larger fruit producing or vegetable producing plants take much more time, need more sun and more warmth. The root crops need an intermediate amount of time, an intermediate amount of warmth, and they need less work as well. Whereas vining plants and tomato plants, you want to be pruning them and taking care of those. Your microgreens are probably the simplest plants to grow. Your herbs are some of the simplest plants to grow, and the microgreens are certainly the quick response. And I've made videos on our microgreens, and they're excellent, highly nutritious. I've talked all about that with broccoli microgreens. Another thing I would say is choose plants that you like to eat, your family likes to eat. Choose plants that have more phytonutrients in them. Like the microgreens actually have lots of nutrient density, and they're so easy and quick to grow and easy to turn over. And like I use a soilless mixture for our microgreens, as you can see, and if you watch some of the other videos, I take that soil and I reuse it for some of the other potted plants as well. Even though all of the leftover, the root and the stems of those plants are still in that soilless mixture, when that's mixed into other soils, such as a compost soil, that creates an ideal environment down below. And I'll talk a little bit about soil in just a second. So growing the things that you want to eat, that's really super important. Soil. All right, so what about soil? If you this is your first time doing this, ignore my composting videos and all that. That's kind of advanced. Thermophilic composting is so important to kill pathogens and weed seeds and all of that. And I've got lots of videos on large composting, weed composting, a whole variety of things like that. But I would say that you can go to a place like Costco or Sam's Club or Lowe's or Home Depot and pick up a vegetable mix or a potting mix, which is quite a bit different than garden soil or compost. So if you pick up an intermediate to high grade potting mix or vegetable mix, that's all you need. That'll have the nutrients in it for your soil. And this is really just a basic introduction. There's lots of things that I have to say about soil, but if you just want to get your feet wet and get successful picking out either a medium brand or high brand, ideally, it's like feeding your plants really good nutritious food, vegetable mix or potting mix. Don't pick up the garden soil or the compost unless you want to do some mixing, and that's beyond the scope of this video. This is basically just a nuts and bolts introduction to things that you can grow easily in an apartment or really small location. So that's the soil. Oh, containers. Containers are really important. We've been growing in all different sorts of containers. There's 2 containers that we're using all the time. And now we use lots of natural containers outside, like you'll see the rumble wall. We're using concrete block materials and all. You'll see that we're using a whole variety of materials. But the 2 basic types of pots that I would recommend getting to start out with, I'm only talking about to start out with, are either plastic or getting terracotta, the ones that look like clay. The terracotta are, I don't want to say they're idiot proof, but they have holes in them, and you get a saucer pan below them, and they're porous, so it's difficult to overwater them. And overwatering is the #1 mistake that all of us make when we're first learning to grow vegetables. So by having a kind of an idiot-proof pot like a terracotta pot really works out very well. Now they're more fragile, they break more easily. If we bump into them, knock them over, pick them up and let them slip, they will start to break down over time. But the terracotta pots are really good. They're kind of heavy. They're more of a challenge if you have a disease to potentially disinfect. They're more fragile as well. Plastic pots, as long as they've got holes in them and you've got a saucer underneath them, I think are really good as well. They're lightweight, they're easy to disinfect if you have any problems at all. Easy to clean, easy to stack. You can put them in storage if you don't need them for quite some time. And then, now I've made videos about using buckets and drilling a hole in the bottom of the buckets and putting a wicking pad or using a cloth underneath it and then putting it on a rain gutter. So we put a rain gutter with caps on it. You only water from the bottom through the rain gutter, and the water gets wicked up into the soil inside of the buckets as well. So those are things, we can talk about those if people are interested in that. We have a rain gutter garden system that we've been using for years that's a much larger system than 5-gallon buckets, and that's worked out very well for us. The other thing I would say is your support structure. So if you're going to be growing beans or tomatoes, eggplants, the shape, and all right, so I should say this about the pots as well. So the shape and the depth and breadth of the pot should be appropriate for the mass of the plant that's growing. So if we're going to grow a great big tomato plant that's going to produce a whole bunch of tomatoes, or a great big pepper plant, bell pepper or banana pepper plant, or an eggplant that's going to produce all this beautiful vegetable for us to consume, and the plant gets quite large, we need a sizable pot to meet the needs of that plant. So that's really important, choosing the right size pot. And if we're going to grow long carrots, we're going to get those 12-inch carrots, and we want to have at least a good 14-inch deep pot. So think about what's actually growing in it and try to make sure that we're going to meet the nutrient and the root mass capacity of the plants that we want to grow when we're choosing pots. Support structures. So when we think about support structures, especially if we're going to have it out on a balcony or on a fire escape, there's going to be winds at different times, and things may look so super stable and so beautiful when you're growing your tomato plant and all, and if we don't stay right on top of them, pruning them and keeping them supported, the whole plant can tip over. If it's a terracotta pot, it can break. You can damage the vegetables that are on it, and that's disheartening when that does happen. So having an adequate support structure, and you may be harvesting from it and actually pull the plant over as well. So think about the support structure, how you're going to set the whole system up, and I would just play with different systems. Sometimes just simple bamboo can work quite easily, but we may want to pick up some sort of trellis. And you probably, if you've watched any of our videos, you see some of the trellis systems that we do. We actually make tomato cages here out of different materials, but one of the materials that I've used the most successfully over the last few years is using concrete mesh. But there's a whole variety of things that you can pick up at the Lowe's, the Home Depot, Costco, those sorts of places. I don't like those chintzy little cone tomato cages. They're never strong enough to support the tomatoes, not any of our plants anyways, and a real hassle to harvest the fruit as well and to manage them. So that's pots, the watering. Choosing seeds. If you're just starting out and times are tough, getting dollar store seeds, or going to whatever box store or whatever, or order if you want to. There's MI Gardener. They're probably getting very low now, many places. So there's many different seed sites that you can order seed from, and just about all of them will tell you how to sow the seed. So whether it needs to be just the tiniest little seed, sometimes it needs to be on the surface of the soil. And recently I talked about pot positive photoblastic, negative photoblastic, and non-photoblastic seeds in a recent video. Within the last 2 weeks, it was one of the videos that I posted. I can't remember what the name of that video was. But when we're sowing seeds, we need to make sure, do they need light in order to germinate, or like most seeds, they don't need any light at all, and I just cover them up. And I'll make a video soon about the seed starting here. I just cover them up with another seed tray. And there's all different seed starting pods that you can pick up. The peat pods that sort of expand and swell when they're watered. I wouldn't do the whole egg thing like many people have talked about, putting them inside of eggs, because I think moisture can get trapped in there and we can have problems. And it isn't the healthiest way, because eggs aren't always as devoid of infectious agents as we might think that they would be, depending on how the chickens were raised and all. So those are my thoughts. When it comes to overwatering, I've made that mistake many times. You could pick up a moisture meter and stick that in the soil to see how it's doing. You could use a self-wicking system like we talked about. There are terracotta waterers. There's also a system that we bought here for putting in pots that is a wicking system that basically it's a little cone that fits into the top of the pot, and it has some small plastic tubing that goes into a bucket that has water, and as long as the whole system is primed first, that plant will take the water and suck it up from the bucket. You can't have the bucket higher than the plant because it'll drown the plant. And I'll put a link to that in the description below. If you have other suggestions, good books, resources for the very beginning, the apartment gardener, or good websites that you think are really good, please put a link in the description below. I'm happy to answer any questions about this, but I'm not really an expert in this really super small scale apartment gardening. But I'm always excited to see people get their feet wet and start growing their own food. I think I do have a couple of decent videos on growing microgreens, and that's really nutritious food, super easy. Within 10 days, you can have your first harvest, and you can just keep rotating your trays of that, and then that soil you can be using over and over again. I'll probably make a couple more videos about how people can work in small communities or in social groups for how to gather materials from other people's waste and potentially do some composting, how to select someone's yard to be able to start growing food in if different people want to work at different times, so there's social distancing, so that one person can go in and be responsible for killing off the lawn, in other words using tarps and all, and I'll talk about that. If you do want to see that, please leave a comment down below, and I'll be happy to make a video about that, how people can potentially set up their timing so that they're not necessarily at the garden plot at the same time, but a group of people could potentially work together, not simultaneously, and produce a fairly decent yield over the summer months. Now, if you're in the eastern United States like I am, I'm in Zone 5A, I wouldn't recommend, unless you want to take plants in and out, you need to be watching for your frost, because we don't put our crops outside until after May 25th, Memorial Day. We've lost too many plants over the years as a result of a late frost, and so that's something to think about if you do want to put plants out on a balcony. You can get everything set up and it look awesome and be super excited about how things are going, and you didn't catch it and a frost hit that night. Especially if you're on the low floor level, when that cold air settles down there. So if you found this video of value, please give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and by all means, folks, take care, stay safe, and start getting a green thumb. Start growing some food. Bye-bye now.